A couple different icons here, just to give you some examples. This, one of the ones in the Hagia Sophia, I believe, picture of Mary, Jesus here as well. I believe this is John. Probably John the Baptist, if I remember correctly. All right? And so, icons are very stylistic. Right? They're depicted in a certain way. The features are different than what you would see in more art that would be more three-dimensional. This particular image is of Constantine here, Justinian here, presenting before Mary and Jesus the city of Constantinople, or model of the city of Constantinople by Constantine, and a model of the Hagia Sophia Church by Justinian. So the prominence of Mary, Jesus, of course, depicted as a child. These are some more modern icons. Modern icons still very prominent in Orthodox Christianity, Russian and Greek and other forms. This, if I remember correctly, is Paul. And this one, the first one was Thomas, this one was Paul. Right? So very stylized, usually people pictured with a halo behind their head, suggesting that they are a saint or they're someone holy. Eventually, though, there developed two groups over this issue: iconoclasts and icondules. Iconoclasts were those that did not favor the icons and actually worked against them, destroying them when they had the opportunity. The major concern here, of course, is idolatry, particularly about depictions of Jesus. So it's not just against images in general, it's about certain images of certain people. But there's also the concern of this kind of misplaced worship. Iconoclasts believe that these other people gave the icons too great of an honor. But they weren't against any art. The iconoclasts often had some art, but it was very simplistic and usually not images of persons. Icondules, on the other hand, were those that favored the images. Thinking things like, if Jesus was human, why can't we portray him in human likeness? That a human being should be allowed to be presented. It's not that they were depicting God, but instead they were depicting a human being, Jesus of Nazareth. Sometimes, though, the opposition was very, very fierce. The Emperor Justinian II, for example, had images of Christ put on coins. He would be deposed, had his nose cut off, and lived in exile for a time. It wasn't the only reason, but that was part of the opposition. Later emperors, however, did not share his views. The Emperor Leo III, who was a former barbarian, began to attack images. Now, of course, the question is, what got Leo so upset? And there's not clear indication. Some people suggested that it was due to the success of Muslims and the presence of Jews. There were some Christians who argued that Islam had been so successful. Now remember, we're still talking about 7th, 8th, 9th century, so it's just in its infancy to some extent. But it's becoming very successful as it conquers various places, and some people said, well, it's because Christians are being idolatrous. And so this very iconoclastic Islam, right, which refuses any images, is successful because Christians, in using their images, are turning to idolatry. And so that might have been why Leo was so adamant against images. Other people suggested that it was due to the monks favor the images, and the monks have some power, and so there's a power struggle that goes on between Leo and the monks. Possibly Leo hated the commercialism of the icons, people selling these things. Eventually, though, he rallies the support of the army, which is largely iconoclastic, calls for the people to get rid of their idols, which upsets many of the people and the monks. I mean, these are not idols to them. These are holy images. He will eventually remove the bishop of Constantinople, destroying one of the few statues of Jesus, as well as other images. The Pope, at the time, Gregory III, condemns his actions. Others, however, weren't as opposed to images. For example, John of Damascus, who was an Arab Christian who wrote in Greek. He was an official under Muslim rule in Damascus, was responsible for collecting taxes. But eventually he resigns his position to become a monk. He will write several tracts during his life to defend the use of images. And he's kind of outside the Byzantine Empire because he's under Muslim control, and so he doesn't have as much to fear if the emperor doesn't like it. Icons are aids, not idols, according to John of Damascus. They're for education. They provide a commentary on the story of Christianity. They make those depicted in those scenes real to the people, help them understand that these were real people. So they're not idols. Certainly the Bible forbid idols, which were depictions of God. But God is pure spirit, so he cannot be depicted in any sort of image. Jesus, Mary, the saints, they were human beings. They could be depicted. Not only that, the Old Testament did allow for some images. The use of cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant, in the temple. And besides that, we're not under the Old Testament. So he's trying to come up with a variety of reasons. Furthermore, very central to all this is the incarnation. God became a human being. So God, who cannot be depicted, became a human being who could be depicted. And finally, images, said John, appeal to the senses, which was an important part of the human experience. So it was just another way to try and share the message of Christianity. People are not worshiping the images, said John, but what is behind the images. And those icons are representations of spiritual reality. Not everybody was convinced. Constantine V, who was the son of Leo III, follows his father's policies. He's fiercely iconoclastic. He will be overthrown by his brother-in-law, who is an iconodule, and then he will later overthrow his brother-in-law. And so this is not just a case of church fight. This is imperial policy as well. Because of this, he will end up persecuting iconodules and calling a council, the Council of Hieraria. You don't need to know that name. Hieraria was a suburb of Constantinople, so it's in the region. In this council, all idols are outlawed. It was blasphemous to render God in coal, wood, or stone. John of Damascus was condemned, and the army was charged to carry out these findings. They would remove icons, relics, anything similar from churches, from cemeteries. But despite all this, the icons continue to be produced. Leo IV succeeds his father, Constantine. You get the impression that these guys had like two names they could choose from. Let's see, my name's Leo, so my son's name's Constantine. My name's Constantine, so my son's name's Leo. He is raised as an iconoclast, right? Because his father is very against the images. But he falls in love. falls in love with a woman named Irene, who is in Conadul. So, he begins to moderate his position towards the images. He will die, but his son, guess what his son's name is? Constantine. Constantine the Sixth. Right. He's too young to rule. So Irene becomes empress. Remember, she's in Conadul. So she calls for a council. This is the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the Second Council of Nicaea, held in the year 787. She manages to create the fear of a barbarian invasion, and because of this is able to replace the iconoclast army with an iconodule army. Right? So the army has kind of been against the images, but she manages to replace a lot of that with an army that supports the images. So the iconodules take over the council. Images, they determine, are not idols. The Council of Herbaria is condemned, and John of Damascus is praised. He is the great protector of holy images. Ultimately, though, she is eventually deposed by the army, who she had worked to try and get support from. But one thing that comes out of this is a distinction. And so the emphasis becomes that the icons are being venerated or honored, not worshipped. Right? So that you'll hear, if you hear about icon use in Orthodox, the veneration of icons, not the worshiping of idols. Now, as I mentioned, this is largely an issue in the East. But in the West, they are hearing a lot of this, and so there's confusion. And they're not really sure what's going on, because they're kind of hearing some of these reports. And so Charlemagne actually thinks that Nicaea the Second, or the Second Council of Nicaea, said that icons should be worshipped. And so he becomes a fierce iconoclast to try and destroy images, because he thinks that the Eastern Church has started worshiping idols. The controversy will die down toward the end of the 8th century and the beginning of the 9th century, but revived again from about 815 to 843. Particularly under the rule of, surprise, Leo. Leo V becomes an iconoclast. He implements a policy to try and get rid of the use of idols, or icons, I should say. Later on, though, an emperor named Theophilus, finally somebody new, decides he too follows this iconodule, follows the iconoclast policy, persecuting iconodules, but he dies. Once again, his son is too young to succeed him, and so his wife, Theodora, becomes empress. And in the year 842, 843, is the one who will finally restore the use of icons as a part of Eastern worship. And from that point on, they'll be used. Today, this is remembered in Orthodox churches as the feast day, the triumph of orthodoxy. So the icons still very much a part of Orthodox Christianity. What questions do you have? What do we need to clarify? Well, that brings us to a conclusion for this part, finishing up the early Middle Ages. So, exam on Thursday. If there's any questions between now and Thursday, by all means, get in contact with me. Even though I won't be here to proctor the exam and you'll be taking it online, I am available through email up until that point. So remember that coming up. Don't forget some of the other assignments that are due as well, with another primary source essay coming up, summaries due